Hey, and welcome to my channel where I experiment with different materials and techniques. In this video, I'm making my Wednesday Addams costume for Halloween, but this type of fit and flare dress can be used as a base for many other types of projects as well. As this tutorial will be quite detailed, I don't want to spend too much time on this intro, so let's get straight to the design and the drafting process. I didn't start this project by drawing the design like I usually do, but I searched for pictures of skater dresses online that would match with what I was picturing in my head. Since I don't like using random pictures in my videos, I quickly drew these designs to help me explain my thought processes. I wanted to make a dress that has tight-fitting sleeves and bodice, but that would flare beautifully from the waistline. I also wanted to create princess seams in the front to create more space for the chest instead of flattening it, and also to the back so that I can take in some of the material and reduce any wrinkling that I usually get when I make these garments. And it has to be easy to put on, so I will be adding a zipper at the back. As you may already know, I draw my patterns from my own measurements, but I've had problems with storing them and I always end up with 5 different versions of the same pattern and never know which one is the most recent one. So I actually just threw away all of my patterns, and for this project I'm trying to draw the patterns on a computer so that I can just edit the document and have the most recent one clearly available. This is actually pretty annoying and takes so much more time than doing it on paper, so let's see if I keep this up for my next project. So basically what I did here was I drafted a sleeve block, which is just a basic sleeve cap that I can use in the future for any sleeve length by extending it if needed. I also drafted the bodice part of the dress, but instead of just the front and the back, I divided both sides into 3 pieces. Both of the sides have a center block which is more or less a rectangle, and both sides of the rectangles will be then connected to smaller, skinnier pieces that have more curve to them. And I drew these curves based on where I would put a dart if I was to make this dress from fabric, but since we cannot use darts on latex, we need to achieve the curves with princess seams. There's pretty good tutorials on how to manipulate darts and turn them into princess seams, so I won't be going too deep into that subject, but I want to mention one term that is often used in dart manipulation, and that is called bust apex. This is the highest point of the curve and determines how high or low this bust curve sits. Here you can see that I have marked the apex with a small circle. Here I'm also demonstrating how attaching this piece to a rectangular one will create a curvy shape. Since latex is expensive and I have to import it overseas, I wanted to make a mock-up first to test out my newly drawn patterns. I traced them on some spandex since it's a stretchy material as well, but since we will be sewing these pieces together instead of gluing, I need to add seam allowance on all sides that will be sewn together. My first mock-up wasn't too bad, but there were definitely things that I wanted to fix before cutting into my latex. The curved pieces extend a bit at the bottom, so I cut off the excess and made that modification to my patterns too. There's also a lot of extra material at the low neckline area. This has been an issue with almost all of my costumes so far, and it drives me insane. So to fix that, I made some changes to the patterns. I took in some of the material from both the rectangular front piece and the curved pieces, from the bust apex upward to the shoulder line. I also did the same for the pieces in the back. I then modified the mock-up pieces to match the patterns, and the second mock-up was looking so much better compared to the first one. At this point, I wasn't sure if I should lift the bust apex a bit higher or just leave it as it is. I also wasn't sure if the stretchiness of the spandex properly reflects the stretchiness of the latex I will be using, and something I only now realized while editing the video is that I'm trying this mock-up on a thick hoodie, which obviously is not how I would wear my final dress. In any case, I thought that it would be safe to proceed with the modified patterns. I drafted a very simple pattern for the dicky collar, and here I'm just showing how I used my newly drafted sleeve block. If you look closely, you can see that the sleeve cap is just a tiny bit uneven. This is because the back and the front of the dress are slightly different, and I wanted to accommodate for that. Probably not necessary at all, but I wanted to make this dress the best latex garment I have made so far, so why not be a little extra with the sleeve caps too? I used the sleeve block to draft a longer sleeve, and I added some seam allowance. Now that I had all my patterns cut out, I started tracing them on the latex sheet. I didn't add the seam allowance on the patterns themselves, but I had marked on the patterns where it should be added before cutting. I also marked where the center line on the patterns run, so when I glue the pieces together, it will help me match the center line. For this dress, the flowy skirt part is going to be a 3/4 circle skirt. If you would like to see how I made a full circle skirt, click at the card on the upper corner, but basically this skirt works the same way. The math behind the pattern is just slightly different, and the skirt will not be as full as a full circle skirt. Just like its name suggests, you only cut out 3/4 of a circle out of your sheet, and the final waist circumference should be drafted to match the waist of the dress bodice. Here I'm cutting out a half circle at once, just because it was the most economical way for me to use the sheet, and then I cut out an additional 1/4 of a circle. Then we get to my favorite part, which is cutting. There's just something so satisfying about using a rotary cutter. Then I will clean the seams that I want to glue with some solvent. I used to clean these seams by dipping a small paintbrush in the solvent, but this always created two problems. Firstly, it always dispenses too much solvent, which made the latex curl. I also tried to avoid spreading excess solvent fumes in the air, despite working in a well-ventilated area and wearing a respirator. Secondly, I don't think it really got rid of the talcum powder and dust that require manual wiping, so I have started using cotton balls for cleaning my seams. They still have their own challenges, like if you use too little solvent, you just end up rubbing up all the fibers on the seam, but at least it works a lot better than a brush. If you watched my Sail a Venus video, you probably remember me complaining about the old glue. For this project, I ordered a new can because I want my seams to be perfect this time. The new glue is thin and runny, so I'm able to spread it thinly and evenly. I also made myself a glue spreader that changed my process drastically. This is basically a plastic palette knife that came with some paintbrush assortment kit that I once bought from Hobby Lobby. I cut the tip so that it is flat, and I used some sanding paper to smooth it out. It measures exactly 1 centimeter, so it's perfect since that's how much seam allowance I usually add. I also love that I can use this over and over again. Once the glue starts to dry on it, I can just peel it off. I've used brushes before, and I don't like the fact that during a project the glue on a brush starts to build up, which makes spreading the glue messy and almost impossible to clean a brush once the glue starts to clump up on the fibers. I've also invested a lot on my actual gluing technique. If you watch my older videos, you see that I just kind of brush the glue on with many short strokes, while this time I really try to spread the glue so that it's coating the 1 centimeter wide surface evenly. Then I let the glue dry very well so that the latex isn't curling anymore. Some people say they even let the glue cure for a whole day, but I usually just wait for a couple of minutes. The glue is pretty much contact cement, so you have to apply it on both surfaces you want to join together. Once the surfaces touch each other, you are supposed to apply pressure and let the glue cure properly so that it can form that strong bond. Here I attach the front pieces together using my trusty foam dome under the curvy seams. I also attached the back panels together, although I knew that I should have added a zipper on the center block first. I didn't have any rubberized zippers readily available, and I was too excited about this project, so while my zippers were drying, I wanted to continue this project as far as I could. I didn't want to deal with a situation like this again, so I went ahead and rubberized a ton of zippers that day, and the next day I inserted one at the back. Then I attached the front and the back from the shoulder seams. Next, I attached the sleeves, making sure that I attached them the right way around now that I drafted different front and backs for the sleeve caps. Once both of the sleeves were attached, I closed the other side seam starting from the armpit and working my way up to the wrist and down to the waist. Then I attached that 1/4 of a circle piece to the half circle and started attaching this skirt part to the waistline of the bodice. There will be 2 seams on the skirt part, the other one being part of the side seam. I didn't think this through before closing the other side seam, because now the other skirt seam will be in the front of the dress. It's not going to be too visible, but it was annoying because I wanted this dress to be perfect. Now that the dress was assembled, it was time to add the details. For the collar, I wanted to line the inside of the neck opening with white latex, as I thought this would make it look more finished. The white parts extend just a bit above the neckline, so that I could sandwich the black latex between the white latex. I also added white cuffs. I would normally add cuffs before closing the side seam, but I wanted the cuffs to have an open side on the opposite end of the seam, so I had to glue them afterwards. They are also glued on the inside of the sleeve so that when they are flipped over, you can't see the seam. And to make things look even more finished, I added a black trim at the hem. I think this latex was 0.5 mm, so it was a bit heavier than the 0.4 mm latex used for the dress, but it gives nice rigidity to the hemline. Now the dress was ready, and after a couple of days of drying, I was happy to try it on. And well, as expected, it was too big. At this point, I was so used to this already, so I didn't even stop to think about the reasons why it was too big. Later on, I checked my patterns and they were drafted correctly to my measurements, and before anyone leaves a comment about how latex clothing should be drafted 5 to 10% smaller than your actual measurements, I know. I usually end up making garments that are too big when I have multiple different pieces that need to be added together instead of just the back and the front, so I think that it might have something to do with the seam allowances, but all of my pieces fit together perfectly, and apparently as a whole the garment was around 4 centimeters too wide at the horizontal measurements, which is approximately a difference of 1 dress size. This wouldn't be the first time my dress size changes in a matter of weeks, but I don't think that that is the case this time. In any case, I modified the patterns again, and I also decided to lift the bust apex up a bit, as I felt that the bodice would fit me better that way. As for the sleeves, it was easy to pinpoint the issue. First of all, I have no idea how I came up with my wrist circumference for this pattern. It's just way too big. Mind you that I have made many sleeves before, and usually they are the only thing that don't require any modifications, but as you can probably tell by now, I mess up a lot, so I guess this wasn't a huge surprise. Another mistake I made was that I just drew a straight line from the armpit to the wrist without checking if the arm circumference is correct, so to fix that I added this curved line at the armpit. Then I got to do something that I don't particularly like but end up doing quite a bit on this channel, which is dissolving the glue and separating each piece. The reason why this is particularly annoying is that you have to use a lot of solvent so it gets in between the seams. This means there's more fumes in the air, so always do this in a well-ventilated area, and I highly suggest a properly rated respirator as well. You're also supposed to let the solvent do most of the work and not pull the seams apart, as that could very easily lead to tearing and more work in the end. So this is a very slow process and it has to be approached with a good mood, so put on your favorite podcast or album and prepare to spend at least an hour or maybe 5 separating those seams. Since these seams were pretty short, I wasn't too annoyed about this, unlike when I messed up with my cat suit over and over again, and even made a whole new suit to avoid undoing those long seams. So once all the pieces were separated, I removed whatever needed to be removed, but I also decided to replace the collar because the white latex was a bit too thin and translucent for my taste. I didn't have thicker white latex, so what I did was I glued some white scrap pieces on some thicker black sheet. I think this one is 1 millimeter thick, and cut the pieces out from that. If you're wondering why I didn't just glue the old pieces on the thicker latex, it's because those pieces were from a batch of white metallic latex that wasn't as glossy as the regular solid white latex I ended up using. I then glued everything back together, and this time I actually aligned the seams on the skirt with the bodice so that they aligned with the seams at the back. And finally, dress 2.0 was ready. Here is the final product, and as always, let's put on our criticism glasses and see how we did. Overall, the dress fits very nicely. We have finally gotten rid of the bagginess that has tormented me in the past. The princess seams work like intended and don't flatten the bust while the waist is nipped in. The back is not so baggy or wrinkly as it usually is with my garments, because this time the back was divided into 3 pieces, and by shaping them I was able to remove some material from the lower back area. Maybe I could reduce the measurements at the back a bit more to really stretch out the material, but some of the wrinkles are probably just caused by the zipper. The skirt part flows really nicely, and in my opinion the length is perfect and exactly what I was going for. I'm also very pleased with the trim at the hemline. It makes this dress look so much more finished. The sleeves fit well now, and the cuffs were behaving like intended. The only thing I wasn't happy about was the collar, because it came undone when I first tried on the dress and it started to separate at the back during this shoot too. The thicker latex doesn't really stretch as much as the thinner one, so the seam is under uneven tension. I should have probably sanded down the surface to make it more porous for the glue. Otherwise, I'm very pleased with the dress. I think a good measure for me is that if I bought this dress, I would be happy with it, if we just ignore the color situation for a while. Another small critique I have is that after separating all the pieces and gluing them back together again, I wasn't as meticulous with my gluing technique as I was in the beginning of the project, but I still think that the seams look better than any of my previous ones. I really enjoyed this project, and I'm very excited to go as Wednesday Addams this year, as she reminds me so much of my younger self. My friends and family kept asking me if I had seen the new show yet because they saw the similarities, but it took me a while to give the show a chance because during the past couple of years I felt like most television series just are not for me. That's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed the process and let me know what you think about the dress. If you would like to see how I made the latex stockings, click here to see my very first latex crafting video and follow me for more cosplay projects. Let me know what you would like to see next by leaving a comment down below. I appreciate you sticking around, and as always, thank you for watching and happy crafting.